Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to this short session this morning. We're going to just look at leading by example. I actually think that leading by example is one of the most underestimated leadership capabilities. I think, we can talk about delegation, we can talk about building teams and motivating and all of these other important concepts. But I ultimately think that if a leader's not walking the talk, that is, their words aren't consistent with their behavior, it's likely to lead to trouble for that manager or leader. So I do want to talk about an important topic today and just perhaps give you a little sense of how a leader can actually go about making sure that their words are congruent with their actions. So we'll spend a bit of time talking about that. At the end of this session, I'll be sending you a copy, of course, of the slides and the recording. So you'll receive that in your inbox at some stage today, no doubt. So look, let's get underway. I'll just share my slides and then we'll have a look at a couple of concepts. So those of you who don't know who I am, just a quick overview if you like. I obviously write books, and this material that I'm sharing with you today comes from my book, Breaking the Proactive Paradox. And I'll explain what the proactive paradox is with you very shortly. You can see that I also do platform speaking and also run workshops and actively play rugby in the Golden Oldies competition in Brisbane. I'm in Canberra today, which of course is the capital of Australia, and traveling back to Brisbane tonight. So that's a little bit about me. I won't say too much more. Now, one of the key objections that people might have for a topic like this is how important is leading by example. Now, I think everyone would think it's relatively important, but I mean, how important is it? And do my people really notice every detail of what I do and what I say? Well, the answer to that second question is yes, very much so. People watch you more than you think they're watching you, because what they're trying to do, of course, is get their cues from you. They're trying to work out what's appropriate and inappropriate behavior. So particularly a new leader in a team, people are watching you very, very carefully to pick up on these cues. So yes, it is extremely important. And if you doubt that, think about how often you watch your leader when they're in meetings, or perhaps the way they talk to people in the corridor. You watch them probably more than they think you watch them. So it's no different to you as it would be for you to, basically observe your leader. Okay. Now, there's three things I'd like to do this morning. I obviously mentioned the proactive paradox, and I think it's important for me to define what that is, which is central to the book that I wrote on this book called Breaking the Proactive Paradox. I obviously want to talk to you about ways of leading by example, because I think that's exactly what we're here for. And I've got a special offer for you at the end of this presentation that you might like to take advantage of. So we've only got a short time together, so let's get underway. And let's talk about paradoxes. Now, a paradox is, the word paradox is used a lot. And I think one of the best ways to describe it is to use the familiar chicken and egg scenario. So the argument is, what comes first? Is it the chicken or is it the egg? And this is one way of being able to define a paradox. So what has to happen first? And it's obviously difficult to work that out. And so the proactive paradox is similar in the sense of this. You can see it on your screen here. And I think it's a fairly simple concept, but basically it works like this. The first stage of the paradox is that when, so if you're a leader and you come into a team environment, you obviously want your people to show prudent initiative. You want them to show their independent judgment in the right place at the right time. Most leaders do, at least. Now, that might vary in terms of the scope that people have, but most leaders want people to show initiative in the right place at the right time in the right way. So that's clear. But also, it's true to say that your team members also want to show initiative in the right place, at the right time, and the right way. So basically, everybody's on the same page to start with. And then what happens is a new leader to a team may have a team meeting, and the leader will sit down with the team and basically make a very, what they believe to be at least, important announcement, as in, I want you all to be okay with being autonomous. I want you to show your independent judgment. I want you to back yourself. I want you to show initiative. So the leader makes the proclamation in a team meeting that he wants his team to back themselves and show their independent judgment, which is all good. But the problem is the team leaders are sitting there, the team members are sitting there on their hands wondering, I wonder if the leader really means this. I wonder if they really believe this, or this is just rhetoric. Because they don't know. This is a new leader in a situation, they're not sure. So what they do is they play it safe. So what they do, of course, is they don't show initiative because they're not quite sure how far to go and how whether the leader really means what they say. So they sit on their hands, and of course the leader notices this. They notice that people aren't actually doing what the leader wanted them to do, which was to show independent judgment. So the leader jumps in and fills the void. So they jump in and they do many of the things that they were expecting their team leaders to do. Now, while they're doing this, of course, because they probably think, well, it's not being done, I have to jump in and do it. But while they're doing this, the team members are sitting there thinking to themselves, aha, I knew it. I knew my leader didn't want me to show independent judgment, because if they did, why would they be jumping in doing my work, you see? And then so therein lies the problem. The paradox this is reinforced. So the team members believe that they're vindicated or validated by not jumping in, you see. And of course, the leader has an even more difficult task to try and get his people to be autonomous in their decision making. So that's what I call the proactive paradox. Let's just move on from there. There's basically three particular phases of that. The first phase is agreement, whereas everybody's on the same page. The leader wants their team members to show independent judgment. The team members themselves want to show independent judgment. Then the second phase is a phase of skepticism, where the team members are wondering whether or not the team leader really wants them to show independent judgment. So they sit on their hands, and of course, it's confirmed later when the vacuum is filled by the leader who jumps in, and then there's confirmation that the team members were correct in their judgment, that the leader didn't want to actually want us to show independent judgment. So that's how the paradox works, and that's a very common occurrence in lots of different situations. Now, what I'd like to do, of course, now is talk about this concept of leading by example. Just spend a bit of time on this and give you a few clues as to how you can do this effectively. Now, I should say this at the outset. It's impossible to get it right all the time. And leaders will make mistakes, or they won't walk the talk, or they'll promise something and they won't deliver on something. This is just part of being human. But of course, if it's done too often and regularly, in a range of different situations, there's an incongruence between what the leader says and what the leader does. And in those examples, people will tend to do what the leader does rather than what they say. So good leaders must lead by example, and good leaders do lead by example as much as they possibly can. And I think it's extremely important because, as I said earlier, the rhetoric of what a leader says is not as powerful as the behavior. And in the paradox example I gave before, because the leader was jumping in and meddling in the work that he or she was expecting the team members to do, the team members took their cue from the behavior rather than the rhetoric. So leaders need to lead by example, obviously. That's what it really means. Now, leaders, of course, have got a menu of things that they have to do as a leader. You know, they've got to motivate people, they've got to get the vision right, they've got to focus and all the rest of it. But I would actually argue that of all the things that a leader does, that this is probably the most important concept for a leader to think about. Because, as I said earlier, talk is cheap. And what happens is that people actually notice what you do rather than what you say. And of course, there should be a consistency between what you do and what you say. But when there isn't a consistency, as I mentioned, of course, you're not leading by example, and other people will, of course, follow your behavior rather than what you say. So there's a lot to this, but let's get to the topic itself. So basically, through their actions, which are aligned with what they say, they become a person others want to follow. Now, what this actually means for you and me is that we need to underpromise and overdeliver. So we've got to be modest in what we say and what we claim. Because if we're not modest in what we say and what we claim, it'll be inevitable that we will have overreach and we won't be able to follow through on the promises that we've made. So my suggestion, say for a very practical thing, is when somebody pulls you up in the hallway and they want to talk to you about something, don't answer them right there and then to get them off your back. Just say, leave it with me. I need time to think about it. Now, that's not a fob off. I'm not suggesting you don't go back to them afterwards, but really what that does is give you that opportunity to think through a little bit more about how you might approach that, because at that stage, you're probably running to a meeting and you really don't have time to sit there and talk to the person anyway. So it's really about aligning what you say and what you do, which is ultimately the important thing for a leader to do. And let's look at a couple of things that you can do. When a leader says one thing and does another, they basically erode trust. I think that's the important point. So, you know, because all of a sudden, what they said the other day doesn't seem to be in sync with what they're doing. And when that happens, you have a situation where trust is eroded. And obviously, trust is an important currency of a leader. And, you know, the leaders that are highly trusted, and if you think about examples of leaders that are highly trusted, I'm sure you can, I'll guarantee to you that that's exactly what they do. What they say is what you see is what you get. And that is a hallmark of trust, because people can feel psychologically safe in the company of somebody who says something and delivers on that. And that is really important. And you can understand, of course, why it's underestimated. The reason for that, of course, is that people kind of think, oh, well, I said one thing, but I've changed my mind and it doesn't really matter. Well, it actually does matter a lot. Not so much to you, maybe, but it often matters a lot to the people that are watching your behavior and listening to the words. And that's where it does matter a lot. So, couple of things that are really important for you to think about when you are leading by example. And the first one that I would say is you take responsibility. And ultimately, what that means is that you don't pass the buck, or you don't sort of, you know, look for scapegoats. That ultimately, when things go wrong in your area, that you may not have caused those things, but when things go wrong in your area of responsibility, that you take charge and take responsibility for that. Because if you don't do that, then people will feel that you're not going to back them in the right place at the right time. So taking responsibility, not passing the buck. Look, a very simple example of that is when someone comes to you and they've made a mistake, instead of getting upset with them for making the mistake, which you probably feel like doing, and it might be even sort of in your head at least justified, that's not taking responsibility. Ultimately, it would be about, you know, okay, it's happened. What are we going to do to fix it? And talking to the person about what you have to do to fix it. And also, I think not letting that person off the hook and saying to that person, what was the key thing, or what's the key lesson that you learned out of that? In other words, put the onus of accountability with the person that made the mistake, but not in a way where you're criticizing the mistake, but more so around how they might not let that mistake happen again. And that becomes really useful. So blame, when you blame people, it costs you your credibility. Keep team members on the defensive, and ultimately it sabotages real growth. So leaders should not be in the business of blame. They're in the business of dealing in hope, not blame. And I don't think there's any value in blaming somebody or a situation from a leadership perspective. There's enough of that goes on, as you know, in the workplace. So leaders have to get on with it. One of the most powerful questions that you can ask your team members is when they're complaining about something, is to say to them, look them in the eye if you can, and just say, is there anything you can do about this? Now, there's only 3 answers to that question: yes, no, or I don't know. Now, if it's no, then you can say to them, then let it go. There's no point in worrying or, being critical of something that you can't do much about. And of course, if the answer is yes, then it's a question of what can you do about it? And if the answer is I don't know, then you can talk about it. So please don't entertain blame from your team members, but unless you walk the talk by not demonstrating blame yourself, then again, talk is cheap and people will start believing what you do rather than what you say. Now, being honest is critically important. Now, this is a bit tricky sometimes because how honest can you be? Well, I think in some cases, of course, there's information that can't be shared with people. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're not seen as an honest broker, then it's going to be difficult for people to trust you. And again, honesty is demonstrated by your actions rather than what you say. So for example, if you said to somebody, look, what you're telling me is confidential, and they find out later that you've actually gone and talked to someone else about it, well, obviously that's going to make the difference, isn't it? So an inaccurate representation affects everyone. So show that honesty really is the best policy. So, you should have a reputation as somebody who is an honest broker. And I strongly recommend that become one of your critical values. And I think if you do that, then people will be very appreciative of you. I'm sure you know people, as I do, who are they're pretty direct as leaders, but they're also scrupulously honest. And because they're scrupulously honest, people will kind of, just accept the directness because they understand that their leader is somebody that they can rely on. So that becomes very important. Now, being courageous also is important when it comes to leading by example. And being courageous means having a go and, walking the talk and not, ducking for cover so on. It's for every incident that occurs. So it's very, very important for that to happen. So, I might say it this way, that walk through a fire, which in this case, I'm talking about a crisis first. So the leader goes first. Take calculated risks that demonstrate a commitment to a larger purpose. So as a leader, it's important for you to not be too risk averse. Now, obviously, to a certain degree, you've got to be risk averse. I mean, you can't just be flying by the seat of your pants and just hope like everything works out. That's not normally going to happen. However, you should be prepared to take prudent risks, because if you don't take prudent risks, then you can be assured that your team members won't take prudent risks either. So it's extremely important for you to back yourself and to make decisions at times. Now, occasionally, of course, you'll make mistakes. We all do. But at the end of the day, people will appreciate the fact that you're a risk taker. And I should put the word prudent before there, because obviously we don't want people to be renegades making ridiculous, judgment calls that are really, just not going to work out. So yes, you've got to be a little bit of a risk taker. Now, I think this is a big one, and I'd like to spend a bit of time on this one. Acknowledge failures. I often think that one of the things I find quite annoying is that a lot of leaders I work with, whether I'm coaching them or not, find it very difficult to admit that they've made a mistake. Now, the fact of the matter is, human beings make mistakes every day. We all do. I do, you do, we all do. Okay, let's just be clear about that. We try hard not to, undoubtedly, but the fact is we do. Now, I think that one of the great qualities of a good leader is somebody who is willing to acknowledge and own their mistakes and to apologize for those mistakes when they're made. So, for example, if you sat down with someone and you had a conversation with them yesterday and you were probably a little bit harsh, you probably went a little bit too far, and you were brooding about that overnight, then a good leader would go back to that person and say, look, the general thrust of what I was on about yesterday, I still believe in. However, I just want to let you know, I probably was a little too enthusiastic in my criticism of you, and I apologize for that. Now, the other person will appreciate that, but you'll notice that the leader did not stand, the leader still stuck to their guns. They still believed in what they said. It's just that they were prepared to acknowledge that perhaps I went too far with the way I conveyed that information. And I think that's very important. And I think some people have a lot of trouble with this. And the big deal here is that other people know you've made a mistake. Like it's not like something you can hide. People know when you've made mistakes. So if you try and cover up those mistakes, then of course, that's not going to work, because people know you've made a mistake. And then of course they see you as somebody who just can't acknowledge their own mistakes. Now, what do you think the team members will do as a result of that? Well, of course, they will do the same thing. They will pass the buck. They'll point the finger. They'll do whatever they can not to take responsibility for their own mistakes. So it makes it okay for your team to do the same, and it defines failure as part of the process of becoming extraordinary. So we don't want you to be running around every single day apologizing for every single thing. Now, obviously, that would be going way too far. But I think ultimately, when you've made a mistake, if you can admit that you've made that mistake, your team members will start to get the idea that it's quite safe to do that as well. And if they do that as well, we're now in a position where we can learn from those mistakes and build upon that. Now, I don't see many workplaces that are like that, but I do believe that it's very possible to get to that stage. The other thing that leaders will do in terms of leading by example is they will create solutions. So it's always about what can we do about this situation? They're always looking to create an answer or look for a solution, and this is very, very important. And I honestly think that, you may have been taught you may have gone to some of these management programs and they told you that you're supposed to sit there and listen to people for 45 minutes whinging about something. I actually don't think there's any value in that at all, not mostly. So if you spend 45 minutes whinging to somebody, they spend 45 minutes whinging to you and you listen, Well, let's have a look at this for a minute. You've wasted 45 minutes of your time because really nothing's been solved. It's just a whinge. They've spent 45 minutes of their time having a whinge. That's 90 minutes of time that's taken up, both of you involved in that conversation. But ultimately, it's 180 minutes that have been taken up by whinging because you and the other person can't spend time doing other things. That's a very expensive whinge and no solution. And what I strongly recommend you do is that when those situations arise, just politely stop the person and ask them what the solutions might be. And, you might want to look into John Whitmore's great model, coaching model of GROW, and actually go through the process of the GROW, and that'll be another video, another webinar that we'll run through at a different time. But I think it's really important to do that. Don't dwell on the problems, and I think the key point here is to offer solutions and then ask the team member for more. So I think it's all about solutions. And I think if leaders don't do that, then they're just a sort of a conduit for a whole lot of whinging. And I personally don't think that creates that doesn't do much really. I'm not sure that people actually feel better after they've had a 45-minute whinge to their boss, particularly if there's nothing solved in the problem. And as I said earlier, it's a very expensive way of being able to download. And I don't think it's your job to sit there and listen to that necessarily, unless you can still be empathetic. But the point is, come up with a solution that's going to help them solve the problem. All right, folks, that's it from me today. Now, next, you're probably aware, or some of you would be aware, that every Friday I have one of these sessions for 30 minutes. I like to keep it nice and short because we're all busy. So it forces me to put in a lot of information in a short amount of time. And we've got another session next Friday on the 13th of May, and that's going to be on how to create a team purpose statement. And I think you'll enjoy that. And it just brings the team together. It galvanizes the team. So I'm going to talk about that, my own experiences with that, coming from my book, Winning Teams, the 8 Characteristics of High-Performing Teams. So all you've got to do, of course, the link is in there. I'll be sending you a copy of the slides and the recording today, and you'll be able to just click on that just as you did today, and you're in. And finally, as I said, there's a special offer. My book, Breaking the Proactive Paradox, Maximizing Performance Through Empowerment. If you check my website, you'll see, and in fact, if you look at Amazon as well, it's around $53 plus postage. But if you send me an email today, I'm willing to give you the book for $26 plus postage, and I'll sign it for you and send it out to you. So there's a special offer for you. Let me know if that interests you. There's a lot of really practical things in the book, such as the section that I ran through today, which is leading by example. So thanks, folks. I'll just stop sharing for a moment. Thank you, everyone. We'll look forward to catching you next week, and have a wonderful weekend. And I hope you had a good week and a great weekend to do a little bit of relaxing. Thanks, everyone, and I hope to catch you next Friday. All the best. Thank you and goodbye.